Police officers share criminals who snitched on themselves. Story 1. I've had countless times where dudes give consent to search them or the vehicle, and they end up having drugs. It baffles me why you would let me search if you don't have to, knowing there's some dang heroin in your car. Seriously, what is the proper way to handle this? If you give consent and the officer looks, he may find nothing. If you tell them no consent, they bring a dog or create probable cause, and they look harder, thinking you have something to hide, or the dog finds the drugs. If an officer asks and you know you have drugs, what is the correct way to go about this? If an officer asks and you know you have drugs, what is the correct way to go about this? Politely say, "No, officer, I don't consent to any searches at this time." If he pushes you, say, "I understand, officer, and I want to be as cooperative as my rights allow, and I do not consent to any searches at this time." Do not provide specifics as to why, just repeat the phrase that pays. "I do not consent to any searches." He may threaten to bring out the canine, and maybe he will. Worst case, the canine comes out and the canine finds something. You can still challenge the grounds for the search in court. If a judge says he didn't have cause to search your car, the charges get thrown out. But if you give consent to search your car by inviting him in, the need for probable cause to search goes out the window, and you've got no chance of getting the results of the search thrown out. Edit, you should check out comments below regarding current Supreme Court rulings on traffic stop detaining to bring out canine units and whatnot. Good stuff from this one guy. Key takeaway, verbally do not consent to a search. Keep saying it. The following part of my comment was accurate. Back in my day, if he thinks he's likely to find something, he may actually seriously consider it. But canine calls cost time and money, and he's going to weigh that drain on resources versus the likelihood of finding something in your car. It may come down to whether or not the canine crew is working that night, or if they're on the other side of town. Most likely, he threatens the canine, you keep saying no, he walks back to his car like he's about to call them out, and he runs your information in his car. If you come back clean, he'll likely come back with a ticket for whatever reason why he pulled you over and cut you loose. Sounds like police officers are like vampires then. They have to be invited in. Story 2. Pull over this guy for expired tabs, ask for his ID, and he's feeling around for his wallet, can't find it. He says, "Ah, man, I'm one of you, it's cool." "Oh, what department?" "Oh, actually I'm a security guard, but same thing." I'm polite. "So where's your ID?" "Oh, it's in the, and he motions to the trunk. "It's in the trunk?" "Actually, no. My BS radar is going off." "Okay, want to get your ID out of the trunk?" Nah, I don't have it." He starts looking around for another story to use. "But now I know I'm supposed to stay out of the trunk." He's also not giving me any more information. "No ID, then I have to take you in and get you fingerprinted. I'm going to get into that trunk one way or another." He's looking like he's lost. I ask him what's in the trunk, but he's not talking anymore. We pull him out and get him in cuffs. Another officer takes him to get ID through fingerprints. In the trunk was a police uniform with fake patches and a metal badge. No gun, but a duty belt. He also had stacks of CP. This is a guy who a neighboring city had been looking for months. His MO was to dress as a police officer, talk to kids, and you can figure out the rest. If he just gave me his name, I could have looked up his ID and verified he had one. I'd probably have let him go, but... Edit, the neighboring city had zero information as to his name. They only had a vague description of the car and the fact he was posing as a police officer. In fact, what he would do is start talking to a kid in the 9 to 12-year-old range, tell him he has to be taken in for questioning, handcuff the kid, and take him to his car. He was a bad dude. Honestly, I'm really happy about this one. Good on you, man. Thanks. Story 3. Not a police officer, but I do know of this house in my local village that was a notorious drug den. The police came to search the place, but couldn't find anything. As they were leaving, the lovely owner yelled at them that they should have brought the drug dogs. So yeah, they came back a few days later with the drug-sniffing dogs and found huge amounts of drugs hidden away. Absolute morons. Similarly, when I was growing up, a cop approached my mom, an attorney, at our house. She closed the door behind her, and I watched the interaction inside with my doggo. Now, my mom was always very honest with me about criminal stuff. She probably wanted to scare me out of committing crimes, something that largely worked. She comes back inside a good 30 minutes later and tells me about the stupidest meth dealers ever. Guy and girlfriend sell mad meth just down the block from my house. They are the big boy distributors of the area. Small but biggish city, don't know how the frick meth scene works, and the cops have been hoping to bring these guys down. Well, the cops caught a break when the meth heads confessed to a dispatcher. Turns out they were robbed by a rival dealer and their computer was stolen. This is the early 2000s, so desktops were still pretty clunky, along with all of their meth. They call 911 and proceeded to tell them all of these details, somehow never realizing their stupidity. The cops swooped in, station is literally 2 minutes away, arrested a lot of them, and then told my mom everything. They were in our neighborhood, and my mom knows and is loved by everyone. Moral of the story, when reporting your house being robbed, maybe leave out the part where all of your meth was stolen. Story 4. Currently watching Live PD, and the guy told the officer, "I have caffeine pills in my back pocket." Gets them out, puts them on the hood, everyone's chill. Dude then comes clean and says it's Molly, and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" Other officer says, "No." Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. Same. Saw one ironically in my hometown where a woman pulled off the highway unnecessarily with another car that the cop initially intended to pull over. She mentioned to the cop that she wanted to have a few words with the other vehicle because they were being buttholes and tried to race her. This is why the cop pulled the other car over, because they were speeding. Anyways, the officer tells her no, that she needs to leave and that it would not only be unsafe, but also illegal if she got out of her vehicle like that on the side of the highway. She says, okay, whatever. The cop proceeds to speak with the other vehicle and she's still parked there, now yelling out her window at the other vehicle. Both the cop and the people are laughing and he still does nothing. Cop goes to write the speeding ticket and this witch gets out of her car and approaches the other vehicle. He finally freaking cuffed her and put her in the squad car, all the while she's complaining that it's completely unfair. Was completely dumbfounded. Story 5. Not a cop, but pretty applicable to the thread. When I was in high school, I liked to park in parking spots that cars had parked poorly next to, just as a screw you. One time I was at a high school football game, and a Jeep had parked like crap. He was nearly halfway into the spot next to him, and parked at an angle. I was driving a '98 Chevy Silverado, big old pickup truck, at the time, and I had my brother help guide me into the spot, so I was perfectly in line. That made it so the driver door was completely impossible to get in. I took a picture for the novelty of it and went on my way. When I got back to my car, the Jeep was gone and every panel on the passenger side of my car was keyed. There was an officer nearby, so I told him about it and showed him the picture. He told me there's not a lot they could do because there were no witnesses, but he'd give it a shot. He looked up their license plate, called them and asked them if they had done it. They confessed and ended up having to pay $1,600 in restitution along with getting a felony. So, bro, used to drive an old butt Scottsdale Custom Deluxe and loved messing with crappy parking people. Story 6. The absolute best example of this has to be Dennis Radar, aka the BTK Killer. For those of you unfamiliar with BTK, it stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, and he was a notorious serial killer spanning several decades from 1974 until 1991, and he's responsible for at least 10 murders. Anyway, BTK went silent for a long time, and nobody had heard anything, up until 2004, when he started sending in letters to the police and media again. In 2005, he sends a letter to the police asking if he sends in a floppy disk, will they be able to trace it? They tell him no, so the doofus sends them a disk. They're able to recover metadata from a deleted Word document from the disk, which contained his name and the church where he was president of their council. They were easily able to find him after that, and he was arrested and eventually given 10 consecutive life sentences. He probably could have gotten away with all those murders if he would have just stayed silent. He made so many mistakes, trusted the cops when they said they couldn't use something against him that he volunteered to send, didn't do a quick Google search, and didn't use a fresh disk. Floppies aren't exactly expensive. He wanted the fame that came with being a serial killer. He would send letters to news stations to taunt them. He was fine with being caught, as long as it meant he'd be infamous. Story 7. I had a car pass me once. Passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "Screw the police!" He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. The registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration, and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car, and they both started with the free speech thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the finger or swearing, which is 100% correct. When I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation, suddenly they got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants, and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story: tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. Like the Chris Rock video, how to not get your butt kicked by the police. Literally, I tell people all the time, be careful who's in your car. I've seen guys throw bags of coke and guns under the driver's seat after a stop without the driver having a clue what's going on. Story 8. I'm a nice guy, and I enjoy a chat. You'd be surprised how much this lowers someone's guard. Stood in full uniform, people will just start telling you things that could get them in trouble. Multiple times I had to tell people to shut up. It was usually petty things like where they hid their weed stash, that they'd got a bifta in their pocket for later. Not really worth the time and effort to deal with how squeezed we were. One time a guy really got himself in trouble by effectively telling me he had stolen property on him. I had to act on that one. Are you from the UK? I had a cop stop me because a robbery had just happened in the area, and they were looking for tools, so they never said anything about whatever else they found. They just told us to get off the street, as it was late, and do it somewhere else. Are they even allowed to do that because something more serious is happening, or was it just so they didn't have to deal with it? Yeah, I am. We can use discretion if we want to. We just have to be able to say why we let it slide if we get questioned by supervision. We would get in a lot of trouble if we let someone off for something serious, though. Story 9. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling with my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later, we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side, we ended up catching him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspects, I asked the suspect if he had had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said, "I have never been there. Ask the ginger lady." Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering up for her ill daughter, who would have never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Story 10. Not me, but my boyfriend. Boyfriend's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing about 35 miles per hour in a 25. Boyfriend pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. Boyfriend laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, "You know, registration, insurance," whispers, "a little bit of weed." Boyfriend, "What?" Guy coughs and says, "Registration, insurance, and a little bit of weed." Boyfriend laughs again and says, "Seriously, can I see?" Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. I was the one that might have gotten away with it, but the cop pulled me over and says, "I clocked you going 86. Actually, I was going 85. I had the cruise control on." "Yeah, that's still over the posted speed limit of 75 miles per hour. "Oh, yeah, I guess it is." "I know what I'm about, son. Don't try to tell me I was going faster." Story 11. Pulled the guy over because his car was looking pretty run down. Wanted to lecture him that he shouldn't be driving around at night with only half his lights working. We got out of our car. I approached the driver window, and he looked at me and said, "Yeah, all right, I admit it. I smoked weed." Alrighty then. Wanted to give him another chance. "What? We know your lights are broken." "No, I smoked weed." Cue eye roll. Bonus. God dang it, man. So we parked his car and drove him to have a blood test done. We were already done with our shift for an hour because we waited a long time for the doc. So when we got out, I was about ready to go home. He turns to me and says, "I can't call anyone to pick me up or I'll get into trouble." Good Samaritan kicks in. End up driving the guy home. He's a chill dude, obviously. Don't know what happened to him after. He probably lost that internship he kept talking about. Poor guy. Story 12. Okay, so we had a DUI accident where a guy kept driving straight into the woods into a tree because his GPS was predicting a future street. He walked back to his hotel room and left his check-in papers in the car. So we went to the hotel and went to his room and knocked on the door. He did not have to answer, but he did. He was pretty clearly drunk. I asked him if he had anything to drink since the accident. He did not have to answer, or he could have told us that he drank after the accident. He said, "No, I haven't had anything to drink since the accident." And where I'm from, you have 24 hours to report a property damage only accident, so it wasn't even a hit and run. So as I'm locking the guy up, he tells me he's a lawyer. I told him, "I hope you're not a defense attorney." But in his defense, he was drunk. "Michael, there's no road here. The machine knows." Story 13. I was asked to help keep peace while 2 probation officers searched a guy's house. Before everyone gets upset, in most jurisdictions you have to submit to a search of your person and your home if you're on probation. During the search, a PO lifted the probationer's mattress and said monotonously, "Wow." The probationer got upset and said, "Yeah, it's frickin' meth and a gun. Arrest me. I don't give a care." Turns out the PO found a huge dill pickle dough, but after the guy opened his mouth, the PO lifted the mattress more and found a bunch of individually wrapped grams of meth and a Glock 17. The PO said that seeing the dill pickle dough was enough for him to ignore the mattress, but because the guy said something, he kept looking. That guy's attitude and his need to open his mouth got him 10 years in prison. Life pro tip: how to hide your stuff. Life pro tip: hide illegal items under intimate toys. Story 14. Fellow officer stopped a car for a turn violation. Guy is a wannabe drug dealer who we have seen around the bars before. We're talking with him and ask permission to search his car. He agrees. I'm BSing with him about sports and weather, and the officer finds a duffel bag. So I joke and say, "Nothing in there that's dangerous, right? Like bombs or grenades or explosives." He nods and says, "Yeah, a bunch of dynamite." I'm waiting for him to laugh or smile or shrug or do something that screams it's a joke. Nothing. I say, "I'm going to open the bag and look, okay?" Expecting at any moment he will stop me. He doesn't. It was 8 sticks of dynamite he stole from a construction site. Separate story. If he didn't say anything, I would have ignored the bag, thinking it was tools. Story 15. Not a cop, but a public defender, had a client who made a long statement that didn't help her case, but the judge was letting her go without setting bail. Before leaving the courtroom, however, I was informed that police from another precinct were coming to pick her up, and she'd be held until they did. They didn't get her until much later, but I told her to absolutely not say anything to them, to keep her mouth shut. The next day I went to do her arraignment, and I got the notice of any statements, which started with, "My lawyer told me not to say anything, but this is what happened." Admitted to a variety of crimes. It was frustrating, to say the least. Story 16. A cousin of a friend of mine travels around the state to take in deadbeat dads. Gets to one place, a 4-year-old kid is home, dad isn't. So the cop starts talking to the kid, making sure he's okay and such. After a bit of this, the kid says to the cop, "Want to see my dad's secret garden?" Takes him to a closet with a false back, opens it up to see a small pot farm. The guy gets home to a few cop cars and a few charges. Good reason to not leave a 4-year-old home alone, I guess. And not to commit crimes where you live. Don't poop where you eat, folks. Story 17. Some idiots from my hometown broke into a few houses in the early 2000s. Among several stolen items was a handheld video camera. They proceeded to record themselves breaking into several more houses and posing back home with their haul. Several of the items, including said camera, ended up at pawn shops. Well, when the battery died, they didn't remove the tape. As is customary, the pawn shop found a compatible charger and watched the recordings. Copies of their fingerprints, IDs, and the video were turned into the police, and these morons went to jail. Almost everything from the videos was recovered from the area pawn shops. Story 18. Not a cop either. Friend was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt while he was with a few buddies. Gets handed his ticket. Guy in the back seat says, "Am I going to get a ticket too?" Officer replies, "Well, were you wearing your seatbelt?" No." "All right, can I see your ID?" Not the brightest fella about. Hey, no fair, I want one too. Well, if you insist. Story 19. Not a police officer, but my mom once managed to talk her way into a lesser fine for a traffic offense, but wasn't satisfied with that, so managed to sass her way right back into the full fine. Sigh. Done that. Gotta know when to hold and fold, and sometimes you learn that lesson the hard way. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.